The moment we start living with purpose, the past suddenly makes sense. That's something that I realized a couple of days ago. As in, for a few weeks, I was like, okay, I really need to get certain things moving, including getting things done for the professional association. And I had said during Easter, I'm going to get it handled. And the reason I had not had it handled was I actually didn't want to be part of a professional organization related to being a therapist anymore. I had been one for a long time, and at some point when I couldn't walk anymore on 2 feet and hence couldn't clean anymore, it became harder to receive people here. And then the health insurance company decided to no longer have us paid for the treatments we gave. I was basically done. So I had done everything that I needed to do when it came to extra training courses. So they had something very specific that they needed us to do in order to get payment for the clients. And then all of a sudden it was over and done with, and I was very disappointed. Now combine that with that my life was already upside down because, well, I couldn't stand on 2 feet anymore. I couldn't walk, couldn't sit with anything on my lap. So um, the whole thing that I had built here locally was over and done with. And the way people reacted to certain things, which actually was beyond anything I had done, it was something from my predecessor. I felt like, this is no longer working out for me. So at some point, I changed things and I decided to fully go internationally and see people on location. And that meant I didn't have to receive people here anymore. I didn't need to see them here. I would come to them. And well, since there was no payment done by any health insurance company, I was like, okay, well, you know what? I'm done with the whole thing. And then all of a sudden, I helped someone out, and that person decided to not live up to what we had agreed upon. And as a result, I had worked a lot of hours for this person and, well, no payment. And the only way to get paid basically was through some code. And that code was linked to me being linked to a professional association. And I was like, no, do I really have to start it all back up again? And here was the thing. Whereas the other one was far away, this one was actually close by, and not just that. I knew the people. As a matter of fact, I had been at the funeral of their father or the husband, depends on who we're talking to. And so, yes, I knew them. They meant a lot to me. I had been to several training courses of their father, her husband, when he was still alive. And I actually had a CD where he was talking about getting rid of things that didn't work out anymore. Like if people say things to you, get this big trash bag and just put it all in there. It was meant for children, and I loved listening to that one CD. Anyway, at some point he passed on. I'm not sure how I heard it, but I did hear it. And like I said, I attended the meeting, the service, the funeral service. So when I came across this association, I was like, oh, that makes sense. But then, of course, came the obligations with that same association. And I was like, oh no, do I need to go through this again? So I did go to the person linked to schedule a meeting, visitation kind of things. And I had to catch up on some things. And like I said, I didn't feel like it. So I said, this Easter, I'm going to do it. So prior to Easter, I was going to this club. I go there more often. I occasionally help out, taking pictures and creating reels, so recording videos, posting things on Instagram. And one of the people working there, I had told him a while ago, well, actually not that long ago, about the park of Purpose, Power, and Perspective, the park for neurodivergent young ones. I told him what I had been running into, my ideas about foundation and all those kind of things. And then he said, well, I know a thing or two about that one because I've been on the board of this foundation. And I was like, yeah, that's true. And he said, so I know that you need at least 3 board members. And he mentioned the roles and some other things. So when I went to the club, at some point I got talking to someone, and he said that he had heard about my plans for the park of Purpose, Power, and Perspective. And so nowadays I talk about the hub for neurodivergent young ones because that's what it's going to start out with. And he was very interested. And we talked about loads of other things too. But this was something that he said, well, we need to meet up and then we are going to talk about this. Okay, so he was very enthusiastic. And basically, we got to talk because the year prior to it, I had taken pictures of him when he was behind the soundboard. And I'm not sure what it was, but it was just fun to do so. And he said, do you remember me? You took all these pictures from me. And I was like, no. But then, of course, when he talked about soundboard, and I said, oh, didn't you have shorter hair back then? And then things seemed to make sense. And I was like, oh, now I'm getting it. So later on, during that same night, someone else came to me and said, I heard about your plans, and yes, I want to join. Fast forward to this week, I was like, okay, I said I was going to work on the professional association. So I looked up all the emails and what I needed to do. And then another email popped up. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but at the beginning of this year, I did a number of Friday Night Lives behind the scenes. And they had to do with setting up the park of Purpose, Power, and Perspective. So that started somewhere around the end of January, if I'm correct. And it started with a workshop. And during the workshop, we were asked, what are you going to do this first quarter? And what are your plans for the year? And I said, I want to become the go-to expert for neurodivergent young ones. And I hadn't said it. And then the next moment, I was talking to a friend and we were looking into funding and other stuff and things I could do when it came to education. And all of a sudden it was like, hey, there is a master's study and I can apply for that. And when I looked at the master's study, I realized that it was exactly what I had been doing. So do you remember that I said at some point the health insurance company said we're not going to pay for these kind of therapists anymore? And I was like, okay, so now what? And then all of a sudden, there was this option to guide certain clients I had seen over here. So basically, I started going to them. And there was another way that I could actually help them on a weekly basis. And that became the model for my income back then. So over the years, the number of people varied, but they had a few things in common. Actually, all clients, whether young or old, me going there or wherever they were, had in common. They didn't have perspective. And as a result, they actually were on the verge of opting out. I'll honestly say I did lose one of my clients. Uh, Long before me, she already started opting out, just not permanently. And although this was one of those times that I was like, ooh, things could go wrong, the moment that she did, it did hit me. It hit me hard. And I don't want anyone to be in that situation that they feel like there is no other choice anymore. And that's why I decided that things needed to change when it came to perspective. And the perspective at first was the perspective like, okay, I want to live. I need to have something to live for and not have everyone be against me. But then I realized that the reason that they didn't have perspective was, and then we talk about inclusion, was because they were neurodivergent. Their brains were literally wired differently. And as a result, if you ask questions, they would answer them differently. They would think about it in a different manner. And things which for one person totally make sense do not necessarily have to make sense for the neurodivergent people out there. So helping those young ones, also older ones, out in that way, I didn't need to be part of the professional association anymore. There just wasn't any reason for it until that moment that one of the clients actually said, well, you know what? I'm not going to sign this document. And like I said, the only way to get my money was to get everything started up again. And so I did. And again, there was some reluctance on my end to, after all this time that I had decided to quit doing it, to actually become part of an association again. So when that moment occurred at the beginning of the year, where I said, I am going to become the go-to expert for neurodivergent young ones, I realized that this was about me not wanting them to experience the same things that I had. And if they did experience them or do experience them, I want them to be able to stand up for themselves, to be able to speak up and be heard. So basically be heard, seen, and understood. And I also realized that I want them to be the way they want to be. So for those who might not, yes, I think you can see it. This shirt is Pirates. It's basically Pirates of the Caribbean, from Disneyland. And I saw a number of people looking at me today in the grocery store while I was wearing that. I think I saw it in different places too. And it was like, yeah, that's my shirt from Disneyland because I love Pirates of the Caribbean, and I already loved it before Johnny Depp was Jack Sparrow. But of course, when Johnny Depp became Jack Sparrow, I needed to see that movie time and again and again. And of course, there were sequels, so that was easy. But getting back to the whole perspective thing, and all the things that before didn't line up, when I got the forms this week from the school where I'll be going to, the University of Windesheim, there were a few things that I realized. Well, first of all, I was like, okay, I think I need to call them because administration is not getting that I have different papers than other people do, so I cannot just enroll easily. We have to do it in a different way, and I already talked to a teacher about it. And well, then there was that email. So I was literally going through all the emails needed for the professional association, and then there was that one. And at the same time, it dawned on me that because of that specific accreditation that I had to do, which was required for me by the health insurance company, that because I had done so, it was probably legitimate enough for them to say, oh, yes, you are the therapist at a certain level, the level that is needed as an entrance level to actually go do this. And I was like, okay, that's cool. So this year, a lot of things happened, especially it started already last year and the year prior to it. So not only did I work with clients who didn't see perspective, and to get back to that one question that I had, it was basically, why do people come up to me who do not see any perspective anymore? And one of my clients actually said, because you are not afraid and they can smell it. So I've been on suicide watch for 4 or 5 people at the same time during COVID. And even nowadays, I still work with people who at times can still be on the ledge. It's like they're getting to see perspective, but it's still hard. It's like a struggle for them. But now I also know there's a huge reason for it. This is not necessarily about a bad upbringing or things not working out with parents or things not working out with friends. It's basically about being different and not being understood by other people in society. And sometimes that, yes, does relate to parents, but it basically starts at school, as early as elementary school. And when I realized that the younger children I see once a week are also dealing with not being understood by, in this case, teachers, I realized, okay, things need to change. And we are not just talking about the young ones at high school and when they are at college and they need to start doing internships. We are actually talking about a systemic problem which starts as early as probably kindergarten. So I've been looking at funding possibilities, also related to the master study. And then someone said, you know what? There is actually a possibility which is related to children. I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I shifted from the younger ones so they could get a job, get internship, finish their college or university, and then start working. But when I started to realize that it is also something that needs to be done for the really young ones out there, all of a sudden the door opens and there it is. There's funding for the really young ones. Now, the cool thing was that when I first started thinking about the foundation, that's probably around the time that from one moment to the other, I had to write something down because there was a deadline for another kind of fund. And that funding didn't happen. They had 5 people, 5 projects that they wanted to choose. I did talk to them. So they thought it was interesting what I was doing, but they said it's too conceptual. And I've taken that to heart and started thinking about, so what can I do? And so sort of that's how the foundation came about. And then I was like, okay, so I need three people to be board members, but who? And then all of a sudden there were 3 people, and well, they seem to be willing to be board members. So this is the week following Easter Monday. And I was like, okay, I said I'm going to catch up with things during Easter. So I started writing things down, and one of the things was that for each profession that I basically do and now can get refunded for, believe it or not, suddenly it's possible. They did a good job, I suppose. There needs to be a little description. And I was like, okay, so I thought about it. And then the same question basically appeared when it came to the board members. They each have to describe in a few sentences what they do. And especially if they also do something else, we need to make sure that the roles they play are distinct. But if they want to be paid, so they can't be paid for being on the board, being a board member, but they can get paid for other things that they do. So even though a foundation is on a non-profit basis, so mostly working with volunteers, I do want them, especially the young ones, to be able to actually earn something and to get a head start. So this whole idea of a hub for neurodivergent young ones is actually not just for the neurodivergent young ones, but it's also by neurodivergent young ones. And I was like, oh, but this is getting interesting. And whereas it had seemed for a long time that I had to, well, it felt like dragging a dead horse behind me and having to pull it with me like dead weight. And now things seem to be different. I mean, I actually reached out to a notary office. I set up a WhatsApp group. I asked Google AI what's needed, checked it, asked somewhere else. A friend of mine is on board. That's the friend with the 2 children who I'm still helping out. And things seem to align. And today I realized, like, yeah, I remember that I didn't want to do it anymore. And see what's happening now. It suddenly makes sense. And I was like, okay, so I called it the park. When it's going to be big, it's going to be the park, and it's going to be several parks, because the hub is the first part for the children and the young ones. And then we are going to add a few things slowly down the line. And if it works, it's going to be something that hopefully can be done all over the world. So we're going to see where it's going to take place. So initially, I actually talked about pride, power, perspective. And then later, I changed it from pride to purpose, purpose, power, and perspective. Because my motto is voice, own view. So voice, speak up, own, be authentic, view, gain perspective. And when you link that to purpose, then we talk about speaking up, as in the purpose behind this all is that the neurodivergent young ones, instead of being seen as a hassle, especially when they are trying to work for other bosses, so a lot of them actually become their own business owner. So basically solopreneurs. And then if they actually get a team, we are getting a little bit of the same confusion because, well, communication is not always the strongest suit when it comes to neurodivergent young ones. Scratch that, when it comes to neurodivergent people. And so I've been working lately on this handout, which gets into communication aspects, but also about goals, purpose, milestones. And when I talked about purpose, as in the goal is that someone speaks up for them, that someone shows society that they need that voice, that they need to be seen, that they need to be heard. And I'm not saying there aren't any organizations out there who don't have an interest in neurodivergent people. There are, absolutely. I mean, earlier this year when I checked San Diego, there's the San Diego University who are specialized in neurodiversity. Why? Because they are very good at tech. And well, what do they have a lot of? Well, tech, data centers. And I was like, okay. And that again seemed to align with my background, which basically is in IT. So when I started setting up that handout, I initially called it the system scan. And the system scan was based on basically mainframe language. So the CPU, so the core of it all, the code, so the software, but then the initial code, which I also refer to as legacy software. And then there's protocol, gateway, so networking. How do different objects speak to one another? And well, if you translate that to people and to organizations, then it's like, hey, someone has an idea. Why is it not working out unless they are doing everything themselves? That's basically what the core is about. And then communication is related to the legacy software. So what do they believe that they need to do in order to communicate? And unfortunately, how to communicate is not a topic that's taught in school. And whereas we do it every day, that doesn't mean that we're good at it. So the most basic of things at some point tend to go haywire if communication is no longer present. So communication is very important, and there are some guidelines. And if you go through the books, then a lot of those guidelines are the same. But that doesn't mean that people accept that there are books and that there are guidelines. And well, last week I told you there are a lot of people out there who actually say, I'm not going to change. I've done it all my life like this, and I cannot change anymore at a certain age. And well, I dare to call people out on that. We are not too old to change. Sure, things might be a little more challenging. I mean, when we're young, it's so easy to create new neural pathways, but it's just like neuroplasticity. We still can create new pathways. And when a part of the brain dies, say because of lack of oxygen or other accidents, then part of the brain that is still viable can actually take over. I'm not going to say it's easy, but it can be done. It is possible. And when we look at communication, the question is, are people even aware of what they are doing or not doing? Are they even aware of their own beliefs and mindsets? Because a lot of things, and when it comes to how we act in our present life, can directly be related to the environment we grew up in and what we have seen as normal. So if you didn't see much interaction communication wise between your parents, and the man was the one who said how things needed to be, and the woman just followed, which was kind of normal in the previous century, at the beginning of the previous century. I mean, I didn't realize it, but at some point when I started working, that's when I learned that in the generations before me, women were no longer allowed to work. And later on, it was assumed that the moment that they would get married, that they would stop working in the office, because at that moment they needed to be the one catering their husband, because he would be the sole breadwinner, because they were going to take care of the children and their husband. So kind of old fashioned if you look at things nowadays. And if you look at things from that perspective, how things were back in the days versus how they are like right now, then I'm sorry, I'm thinking about some things and they sort of mix up right now. And I'm like, I was going somewhere, and quite frankly, I'm not sure what I wanted to say. I do know why I went back there, but that's the thing. There's a little bridge, a little connection that I'm missing. And oh, yeah, now I know again. It happens every now and then. It's something that's related to the EDS. I haven't had it in a while, actually. But yeah, it was there. But what I wanted to say, and this has to do with communication, is back in the days, people were relying on one another to do certain things, whether it was in the household or get a job, earn money, and whether they could communicate with one another or they could even get along at some point, it didn't matter. They were basically reliant on one another. And that, of course, has changed. And with it, communication is becoming more and more important. And that's why it's so sad that there's a group of people being left out because they have a different way of thinking and expressing themselves. And well, basically, that's something that I want to change. The people in IT are notorious for being different, and those are often the people who are those neurodivergent ones. So yes, I am one too. And like I said, when you start doing with purpose, then all of a sudden things seem to align. So that moment that I literally wrote down a few months ago, I want to become the go-to expert for neurodivergent young ones, everything shifted. And at some point, when they said, what you're doing is too conceptual, I already had something like, well, I don't necessarily have to work for you, with you. Let me correct that one. And the reason I felt like I don't need to work with you was because of one thing they said. They basically said, we don't want to be mentioned as partner. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So if they are the ones who are going to sort through all the possibilities of funding, well, there must be other options for that one as well. So now, fast forward, I went back to that idea again, looked up what's there, and then all of a sudden there were all the emails. And like I said, even things from years ago started making sense. And from something which was quite a, I don't look back with fond memories to those years that everything went haywire. And that's not entirely true either, because I've had a lot of fun moments. The oldest one that I was talking about, she got born in 2014. And well, that was the moment that I couldn't stand on 2 feet anymore. But you know, I've got some great pictures with her. And seeing them grow up has been so worthwhile. So let's not pretend that there were no good moments. But I will say, in general, it was a very hard time. It had a lot of consequences. But if I hadn't gone through that experience, I wouldn't have learned to stand up and speak up and understand that, well, if you want to get something done by people in the hospital or doctors in general, then you usually have to get back, because it's the first time you come around, they probably brush you off, and then you come back and you come back again, and then, oh, something must be more serious. And having learned that going to school, that was actually before I became a therapist. So I became a medical fitness instructor at some point. And when I became a fitness instructor and then medical fitness instructor, I got trained by someone who used to be a physical therapist as well. So he basically was teaching physical therapists. And then later on, he was teaching fitness instructors. So he brought the two together. And when he started to explain about certain things like inflammations of tendons and different stages, that's when it became apparent why a lot of doctors don't immediately take action, because they think, well, there must be some mild inflammation that must be able to pass within the next 3 to 8 weeks. Now, unless you have actually experienced that, you're not going to think about what it actually means to someone. But I can tell you 3 to 8 weeks can be a long time. Well, in my case, it became more like 8 years and then more than 8 years. And yeah, I still am dealing with the consequences. But the good news is that because of my experience, I can actually help out other people. And this week, during that same Easter weekend, I have been talking to someone, and he was a decade younger than I was. And we got to talk because of some fire here in the neighborhood. And I smelled it and I heard the sirens, and I was like, oh, I need to check that out. Actually, I think that was Easter Monday. Now I'm thinking about it. So I asked him something about if he knew what had happened and some other things. And then we got to talk about, guess what? About what happens when your knee doesn't function the way it should because of some sort of incident. And this was a guy who likes to push through too, doesn't give up. And well, if he doesn't do certain jobs, there's no income. And of course, he can have others do the job, but he was or is a person who, well, I can be in pain, but I don't care. I'm just going to do it. There's, of course, one thing, there's a reason we have pain. Pain is a warning sign, so we don't want to push through pain. But I also have learned that there are numerous versions of pain. Some are just warning signs like don't put your hands in the fire, take it out. Others are like, okay, yes, there was an inflammation going on, but the moment that you start warming up and then say with 5 minutes or later, then actually it subsides because your body is creating, well, there's fluid joint and that needs to warm up, and then when it warms up and it's more fluid, then things are moving easier. And there is a little challenge aligned with that one, because if you go on too long, then you might feel the pain again and then way worse. So you always have to pay attention to what is it that you're actually feeling in order to know how to act. Now, dealing with pain most of my life, I've known it in various forms, and some were some forms were worse than others. And basically, every day there is a moment that I experience some form of pain. So I'm not going to say it's chronic pain as in 24/7, because I'm not in chronic pain. Why not? Because I know what to do. I know how to prevent myself from having certain, well, let's put it this way. It's when I'm walking or lying in a certain position or sitting in a certain position that it actually starts to hurt. So I know what to do, which precautions to take in order to not feel it. That doesn't mean that I don't feel it at all. It means that I usually get a warning sign and then I'm like, oh yeah, I need to take care of this. So nowadays I'm sort of programmed to be more aware of it. And there are days that I totally forget it. So, and you know, it can be weeks that things are hard, sometimes even months. And then things get better and better and better again. And all of a sudden I'm walking as if nothing ever happened. And my friends will be walking next to me and they're like, I'm missing the sound, the clicking sound of the crutches. And then nowadays I'm switching more and more to my braces. So I've got these big fancy knee braces. They're actually kind of cool because they do have my logo on there. So they are basically dark blue stripes, and then they have my pinup version on there. Someone made those for me, and I'm proud to still be wearing that pinup version. So there's an old one and a new one, and on both braces both versions are present. Now they've changed a little something for me, so it becomes easier to actually wear the brace. But on the other hand, the other part is that it's costing me if I keep using crutches, because I favor one leg. That's the leg that got hurt decades ago. Well, over a decade ago. And as a result, I still have to favor the leg every once in a while, because it's just not as strong. The after effects are there, and that's probably related to not just injury, but also me being hypermobile. But nowadays, it's catching up with me, and my right leg has basically been the leg that I had to rely on. But it's getting harder for my right leg to take over all support for the left one. So that's why I used crutches, but wrists, shoulders, they're not happy either. So that's why I actually switched to braces at some point. But then I realized that because they were constantly, they were made to fit, but there was something that was lacking. And because of that, it wasn't the easiest thing to do. And even with braces, sometimes it's not working. So for a while, I reverted back to crutches. It was just the easier way to do it and was more familiar. But then we come to adjusting things. And then I get back to the whole speaking up thing and doing so with clarity. So for you, if you hear this for the first time, you might be like, she's rambling on about braces and crutches and I don't get it. But actually there is logic in all of it. It just changes depending on what's going on. And if you look at it from a wide perspective, then basically it comes down to, if you have a body where all joints are flexible and the muscles are not capable of becoming as strong as they need to be, and they were once upon a time, but once I couldn't train them anymore, well, that became sort of like a problem. So then things went downhill altogether. Now, the good news is, because I know what it's like, I can help others. And, well, as it turns out, those neurodivergent ones I was talking about are actually the ones who are more likely to be hypermobile. And when I talked to one of the people in that club, he actually said, yes, I know. And I was like, oh, you do? Yeah, because, and then he explained why he knew it. And I was so surprised. I was like, I read about this on the site in San Diego. And then another friend of mine told me that her son actually had said so, IT person too. And now this guy, also IT, said the same thing. And I was like, oh, okay. So, whereas the specialists actually don't know, the people who are actually dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, they start to learn it, especially the younger ones who have more access to data and to other information. So all combined, it makes sense. All combined, it's actually aligned. And like I said, the moment that I decided I was going to be there, not just to learn people to speak up, but to be there for the neurodivergent younger ones, things seemed to fall into place. And of course, it was still going a little bit like, hey, I registered for this and then it didn't go through. because it was too conceptual. But because I had started up things, and even though it was going a little sluggish, I got to talk to one of the teachers pretty quickly. But then when I wanted to register, things went haywire when it came to the administration office. So I had to go back and forth a few times, and then I had to call them, and then even they didn't understand. So eventually I had all the stuff in there, and I was like, okay, I need to do it again. But well, here we are, and they picked up on things, and now it's up to me to finish the whole thing. But how cool is it that I want to set something up, and that for years I already was aware that in order to become an expert, I also needed to do research. And here's the possibility, and I can do it with my own hub for neurodivergent young ones. And well, like I said, apparently there's funding, and I have been checking some other things, and things slowly seem to make sense. And now people are actually showing up. Instead of me having to find people, I tell one, that person tells the other one, and things are happening. And I'm like, oh, that's a different version than I've experienced up till now. And that's actually kind of cool. And so I do believe that when you start to do things with purpose, really think about what is it, what have I experienced that I can help others with. So usually they say, or they ask, what's your story? And well, my story, you can see it in various ways. You can talk about EDS in general, or you can start with what happened in 2014. But you can also look back at all the times that I worked during the IT for 20 years, and at some point ran into new managers, and things would go haywire. Why? Because they didn't know how to deal with people who are pretty self-supporting or do certain things in a certain way and do not fit the mold. So if there's anything about this that resonated with you, whether I'm talking about the handout, which goes into the essence of your business, and you're like, oh, yeah, I know that. I know that feeling of if I don't do the work, others won't do the work either. So, yeah, I cannot run this organization without myself in it because, well, then you're going to miss heaps of money. Or you are like, my team doesn't seem to be interested in what it is that I'm doing, and they don't pick up on certain things. Or maybe you have young ones and you see that they are not understood at school. If any of those things resonate with you, then find me, get the handout, get the system scan. So basically that's going through the handout with you, talking about what works in your organization and what doesn't work, specifically when it comes to you and your team. And maybe you also know those ones out there. Maybe they are in your family. Maybe you are one where you are like, oh, I wish I could get some support for them. Maybe you have some ideas about those parks as well. So I might be setting up a hub over here as the first one here in the Netherlands. Like I said, I want them to be at some point all over the world. So if you have some ideas, then please let me know. And also, if you've heard some things, for instance, when I talked about the whole communication thing and about not being able or willing to change, which I did talk about last week too, then, find me. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. Of course, I do expect you to be respectful. But if we can get the conversation started and we can get people to become more aware of the importance of really understanding people, so basically the importance of real communication, but also the importance of figuring out what makes you happy, what you want to live for. So what is your purpose in life? Just think about it. And if you know what your purpose is, then take a few minutes every day. So at the beginning of the day, set the intention before you go to sleep. Look at the day. What have you done? Set the intention for the next day. And then see what happens. Because the moment that you do become more aware of your purpose, things will start to change. Again, if you have some ideas where you want to hand out, let me know. And otherwise, I'll see you again next week.